Hello and welcome back to Between the 20s. We're continuing our series this time where we look at key off-season acquisitions or extensions or signings and discuss their fantasy impact. So now we are breaking down Dak Prescott, who signed a 4-year, $160 million deal with the Dallas Cowboys, of which $126 million is guaranteed, but as Amrad pointed out to me as we were prepping this episode, that doesn't really matter for fantasy. But Bryce, what do you think the impact of this is for the Cowboys as a whole for fantasy?
Yeah, this is probably the best thing that could have happened to all the supporting cast in Dallas. Ezekiel Elliott included in that. It's no surprise. Everyone knows the Dallas Cowboys, fantasy-wise, had a down year last year. Amari Cooper didn't live up to it. Ezekiel Elliott was one of our busts that we posted about. It just wasn't a strong campaign. But those first couple of weeks when Dak was playing, they were startable. They were most of the time locks. That's going to happen again. The ankle injury does not bother me. He wasn't a particularly mobile quarterback to begin with, so it wasn't like he was using his legs all that much. He's going to be just fine, and the fantasy impact is just huge. Amari Cooper goes back to a lone wide receiver one. Ezekiel Elliott goes to kind of that mid-tier running back one, probably just after that first tier of guys. So good news for Cowboys fans and good news for fantasy players. Dallas Cowboys are going to have a real offense.
All right, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, if you just even look at last year, first 4 games when Dak was there, Dak was top. I think he was the quarterback one. Zeke was the top 10 guy, top maybe 8 guy. Amari was great, and even CeeDee Lamb, who was a rookie last year, he was producing a ton with Dak there. So that's one guy that Bryce didn't mention, and one guy that I think could take a big step this year. I think CeeDee Lamb is going to be huge this year. Could be a sleeper. Could be maybe another Calvin Ridley from last year. Who knows? I think he'll be a good pickup. And since Dak is back, Dak's obviously locked into that QB1.
Yeah, I agree with both of your points. I'm a little bit more skeptical just about the injury as a whole.
Big surprise.
But I mean, I do think it's even, I think a recovered Dak Prescott is better than a healthy Andy Dalton, as much as our friend of the pod Ben would
might
not want to hear that. Yeah, as a Bears fan. But yeah, I think I'm a little more skeptical about the injury. I do agree that it does up the value of everybody else on the team, though. And I think as of right now, that's where we have to leave it. I don't think we can kind of break anything down any further, just because we're not necessarily sure the extent to which he's going to be able to come back to his full capacity. I mean, do you think full capacity is fair? Bryce, you didn't seem too concerned, but is that just not concerned about his ceiling or just kind of more general average level of play?
I guess both, right? So fortunately, we're in the air raid, pass happy offenses of the 2020s and really just 21st century in general for football. So I'm not worried about finding a quarterback at all. I tend to be a later round quarterback guy anyway, which hasn't worked out too well of late, but we'll forget about that. From average play, I'm totally okay with it because my fantasy impact for Dak anyway is just the impact he has on those around him as opposed to Dak himself. I really think Dak will be fine. I probably wouldn't target him as a top 5 guy. I still have 5 quarterbacks I take over him. But certainly okay with starting him every week. But the benefit that he brings to the rest of the team is more important than his benefit himself, if that makes sense.
Amir, you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I still think Dak's going to be a good guy to start, good guy to play. He might take a little bit of time at the beginning. He might have a slow start, kind of getting back into football shape, getting back from that injury. But I think he'll be fine this year. Mike, I wanted to ask you, you're kind of unsure about the Cowboys this year, it seems like. So would you be drafting Amari Cooper as like a wide receiver 1 or Ezekiel Elliott as a running back 1? Are they on your radar in that spot?
Where are we talking? Because you can have a wide receiver 1, and that's just the first wide receiver you picked in the 5th round because you went,
No.
every other
I
position.
mean, it's a top 12 for each.
As top 12, I see probably. Do you see the problem is I feel like, as Bryce said, Dak might have a bit of a slower start to the season, so he may be a good buy low candidate, I'd say week 3 or 4. But I do think that throughout the entire season, when you're looking back at the end of the season, you'll be looking at Amari Cooper as a 8 to 12 wide receiver.
Okay.
What about I'm curious as well for both of your takes, not Amari Cooper, but the other supporting receivers. Amir, you mentioned CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, I mean, as high a ceiling as it gets. And then Michael Gallup, who I feel like we should talk about him every year as the guy's going to break out. We've seen flashes.
Never happens.
Does Dak make those guys startable and or even draftable, I guess, in Michael Gallup's case?
I don't think Michael Gallup, I'd say no. And CeeDee Lamb, I'd say maybe a flex play early in the year until you see something more. But he could have, a Justin Jefferson type season where total breakout. Obviously, Jefferson was a rookie and CeeDee Lamb's going to be in his second year, but that sort of breakout is very possible. Especially as we mentioned, the offense gets a little bit more comfortable with Dak back as the season moves on.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Even if you look at last year when Dak was there, Michael Gallup may have had one good game with Dak. The rest, it was kind of all CeeDee Lamb for that secondary target. So yeah, I don't really see Gallup. Maybe he's a late round flyer. Maybe you can pick him up during the season, but I don't think he's going to be on my radar for wide receiver or flex consideration.
And I'm also interested, Bryce, you mentioned Zeke before. I'm interested to see how the Cowboys defense plays this year, because I think that was a big sort of factor in Zeke's lack of production last year, was just that, the defense couldn't stop anyone, so they were running up the score, and then they would have to come back with a pass-happy offense to make up for it. So,
and in fairness, I'm not sure how much that's going to change this year. They get Leighton Vander Esch back, ideally, which is huge. He's a force at middle linebacker. But Xavier Woods just signed away. So he was probably in a terrible, terrible secondary, he was probably their best player. So who knows what's going to happen? All the mock drafts have them taking Patrick Surtain, who is about as, pun intended, certain of a pick as there is at cornerback. So I don't know how much that defense is going to change, but as we saw in those first 4 weeks, Zeke was being used more in the passing game. Bunch of screens. Tony Pollard wasn't eating into it too much, even though he's a great receiving back. I'm not worried about Zeke. You can definitely, in my opinion, still draft him as a locked and loaded running back one.
Yeah, I think I agree. Just going back to the defense for the Cowboys, they got rid of Mike Nolan, who was a disaster even before he played, or even before he coached for the Cowboys when he was in Atlanta. They were horrible. I don't know why he got hired again. Now they're on to Dan Quinn, who
also
up
Falcons.
and down, up and down. But it's tough to get worse than last year. So I think the defense will be improved this year.
All right, so that wraps up our thoughts on the Cowboys and Dak Prescott's extension, the impact of Dak Prescott's extension on the Cowboys for this fantasy season. Catch us on our next installment of this series.